welcome to a hands-on introduction to large language models like Bing Chat and ChatGPT. This title is a misnomer because these are not large language models, they're services running the same large language model. There are many terms of jargon here in this space. No one agrees with them. So one of the things that I want to do today is talk through the various ways of thinking about these tools, thinking about how to appropriately use them, understanding how they are dangers and how they are opportunities, and working through some examples. I am Dr. Brian Balson-Stanton. I am a researcher and professional staff here at the university in the Faculty of Arts. I am Solutions Architect, open paren, Digital Humanities, close paren, for the Faculty of Arts. No, I don't know what that means either. So hopefully everyone has Bing Copilot or Chat on your computer. Everyone has a computer, which is fantastic. That means we don't have to back up to phones, and we can go there. One thing I definitely encourage you to do is, as I am talking, use Bing Chat to try to explain things, because it will get it right and it will get it wrong in rough proportion. And if you want to check one of its explanations, that's a great interruption, because what we can do is we can work through your prompt and we can work through the explanation, and I think that that will be an excellent exchange. To use Bing Chat, the link that I recommend is bing.com/new. You must do this from Microsoft Edge in an account logged in as a personal account. But yes, please interrupt me. Please play with these tools as I am talking, and when they get something hilariously wrong, let's play with that together. So, who am I and why am I giving this presentation? I have a PhD in the philosophy of data. So I asked a decade ago, what is the nature of data? And it turns out that that is a shockingly relevant philosophical question now, and a BS and MS in information technology. So I'm a technologist and a philosopher, and my job here at Macquarie is basically like SALT. So when researchers have a grant or research project and they need technology, I just get shaken on to the project. I'm a peer collaborator with researchers. This presentation, as I said, is open source. It is licensed Creative Commons by. You are welcome to use it. And happily, I've sent it all to you, so I don't have to pause while everyone gets out their phone. So, what's the plan for today? The plan for today is before the break at 2:30, I'll be talking about how to think about these tools, the concepts involved, the dangers involved, the understanding, the high-level understanding of these tools. After the break, we'll be going into their uses and their specific risks of confabulation, and we'll be ending with audience questions. So in the invite, I asked for folks to send in questions, and so that list at the end is getting longer. If you take nothing else from today, remember that a large language model in its tone to you is always confident. It always uses a confident tone, but it is usually correct. Specifically, these models have no conception of what a fact is. They cannot operate on things as facts or opinions or confidence or what have you. They predict the next word, which means that their tone and register, how they tell you something, does not change based on any sort of epistemic, questions of knowledge, status. They are always confident, because when you read comments online, those comments are basically always confident. The term of art here is not hallucination, but it is confabulation. Confabulation is the idea that patients sometimes make statements that are false or engage in behaviors that reflect false statements or belief, but they do this with no deliberate intention to deceive. These models do not hallucinate. They do not see something that isn't there, because that is implying far too much creativity and cognitive activity, and is therefore giving you a false sense of their capabilities. Instead, because these models predict the next word, they will make a plausible sounding word so that they can get to the end of the pattern, and that is why confabulation is a more apt term. There is no intention to deceive. There is no creativity. There is no false perception. It is merely having a start and an end and making up the bits in the middle. Remember, in this, as in everything, you own the output if you put your name to it. You own the output if you put your name to it. On a calculator, if you put in the wrong numbers, and in that have your quarterly earnings be incorrect, it is your fault. It is not the calculator's fault. This tool cannot be fired. Therefore, this tool cannot be at fault. And we'll get more into that at the end. Now, one thing that I've done throughout this presentation is when I have art or whatnot generated by a large language model, I have a sidebar of the prompts that I used to do that, and I have links to that exchange in case people want to see how I generated this art. So, what are these generative AI/LLM things, and how should we think about them? Now, terms of art. Generative AI versus large language model. If you cast your mind back a few years, you'll remember people talking about AI or machine learning. In many ways, generative AI/large language models maps to that same in-group, out-group identification. That marketers trying to sell you things will use the term AI, and people in the tech industry will use the term ML, and that marketers trying to sell you things will use the term generative AI, and people in the tech industry will use the term LLM. That mapping is roughly equivalent. If you want to be precise, a generative AI usually implies a service which offers an interface to a large language model. But that nuance is lost in vastly all of the communication, public communication. So, what is a large language model? It is a very, 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 very large neural network algorithm trained on most of the internet. If you think about it, what it does is it's a relatively simple computation that is fed most of the internet. It's fed the data source from commoncrawl.org. It is fed most of Reddit, various scraped tweets, quite a lot of pirated books, and so on and so forth. And so it is called a large language model because it is a language model which is fed a large amount of text. That's why it's called the large language model. These things presently are powering generative AI. Now, one thing that I'd like to mention is Bing Chat was announced on February 7th, 2023, which means that it is 226 days old. This technology, in its popular conception, is 226 days old, which means that in terms of the hype cycle, right, in terms of, if you remember back to the web and Bitcoin and all that stuff, right now we are about here. We have no real products using these technologies. Chatbots are tech demos. Trying to use these tech demos for anything resembling real work is a pain in the... We have not reached the peak of inflated expectations because that would require a product. Now, Google and Microsoft are desperately trying to cram generative AI, which is both a floor wax and dessert topping, into all of their products. And there's some interesting articles about how affordances are changing. But remember that right now, we're here. There are no real products that change how you interact with the world that I can tell have been announced, much less delivered. We don't even know the height of our inflated expectations, much less what will come crashing down to earth.
Are we saying we don't have any products for the large language models today? But
Yes.
Isn't like Siri,
No.
all those, because they're using AI and using voice and answering question, are there products using the AI or generative AI, sorry?
Listen to so they are products which use AI, but they are not products which use generative AI. They are machine learning models which mostly do voice parsing based on an incredibly limited set of inputs, which is why you have to keep repeating yourself to Siri. I need to be super careful what I'm going to say here because this is being recorded. I know a lot of folks who are working on it, but to my understanding, no assistant currently has deployed with generative AI. Not least because that would be lighting much larger wheelbarrows full of cash on fire than they presently do. That running these large language models is hideously expensive relative to normal operations. Like we're talking cents to dollars per exchange, not hundredths of cents. So right now we have no products that I'm aware of that genuinely use this, but people are obviously exploring this field with great abandon. Any other questions?
Clarification on
Yeah. Yes.
ChatGPT is a generative AI.
Yes.
And ChatGPT is essentially costless to run to use in a company.
No.
Not the company producing it, the companies that are using it if they've signed up to GPT-4 or...
Yeah, I mean, and it's $20 a month, but that rounds to zero. Yes.
Those things are not expensive for the company to use in principle. The difficulty might be the company still trying to find a purpose to how to put it in their product, how to change all of the nature of the way their product works, that sort of expense. Is that what you mean?
No.
Of running a generative AI model?
But three things there. First, the interface of a chatbot is the world's worst interface because you talk with it and it will always respond and it will never give you an error message. This is not a productive interface because it doesn't allow you to do a thing besides engage with this tech demo unless you engage in a very weird way of interacting with it. So I do not consider ChatGPT's products or Bing Chat to be useful products. I consider them to be tech demos. Second, OpenAI is offering this for $20 a month as a loss leader. Happily, Microsoft invested $10 billion with them and is, well, wheelbarrows full of money are just rolling out the door. So the cost to use versus the cost to run are not nearly the same. And one thing you'll notice that is if you're using their API, the application programming interface, the way one computer talks to another, one exchange will usually run out at about $1 to cost to you. So this is not ready for customers in any sense of scale. Other questions?
To help her generate content.
Yes.
But I guess I gather from what you're saying is she's basically just using another one of these chatbots.
Yes. Yes.
So it's quite simple.
It is simplistic. There are no guardrail. Yes, precisely. Yeah. So that's the thing, right? Is that OpenAI signed up something on the close order of 100 million users in weeks to months. These tech demos are astonishingly persuasive, right? I have edited journal articles with them. I have written code with them with GitHub Copilot. But we haven't seen actual deployment beyond the hype in a way that changes how we work yet.
Change how you work, but it's kind of handy for things like, I need a speech for a week.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, and that's why I'm giving this workshop, because it has changed how I program. It has genuinely changed how I write code, which is shocking to me because I've been writing code for 20 years. And changing how I do something so fundamental is astonishing. But that's not a product. That's something that that GitHub has bolted on and Microsoft has bolted on and gone, isn't this cool? And the fact that they've been able to do that and caused people to make these changes in how they interact with the world when we're here, I do not know what's going to happen up there. That's what I'm trying to communicate. The reason why I'm giving these workshops now is because understanding how to think about these tools, because these tools say I, and believing these tools is wrong, is very important. Because as they are integrated into more and more products, those lines are going to blur, and it will be harder and harder to have accurate conceptions about them. So that is the motivation for this workshop. Because, and what I'm going to get into in this workshop, goodness, I've been talking for 20 minutes, I'm on the third slide, this is going according to plan. The problems with confabulation, right? This slide, everyone's super excited, and then they understand the actual implications of this slide, and they go, oh. And the critical mode that you, the user, need to engage with these tools in makes it utterly unsuitable for Alexa or Siri or the Google Assistant, because we have expectations of literal accuracy from these tools. And we don't want to have to, as we are cooking in the kitchen, stop and go, okay, is this something that I can believe, or is this something that I have to double, like, and that mode switch is what's causing people to go, ah. So no, I don't know of any genuine products beyond GitHub Copilot. Unfortunately, they've already developed that I'm super excited about, because there's some fundamental ways of using this that are hard to navigate. Okay. Foundation models. In the beginning, foundation models are models trained on broad data at scale such that they can be adapted to a wide range of downstream tasks. This is something new under the sun. That at the bottom, you have your foundation model. Then you adapt that foundation model with a great deal of secondary training, and we call those adaptations large language models. And then we put an interface on top of those large language models, and we call that ChatGPT. The term of art that you need to remember is foundation model. And so foundation model is bigger than a large language model because it applies to image and audio and video and everything that isn't take most of the internet and stuff it into a computer. So foundation models, large language models, services. With me so far? Excellent. Generative pre-trained transformers. I like to say ChatGPT because I'm silly, but also because it's a lot easier than remembering GPT. A very common error that I hear is people reversing the letters, so I say ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a specific sort of machine learning algorithm for natural language processing. Natural language processing has been around since the 70s. We have been working on this since the 50s. This is the latest go. The way to think about this is a transformer of text. And so I got Bing to make me an electrical transformer made out of books, right? It transforms text. because it predicts what word will come next. ChatGPT is a specific instance of a large language model. Now, what I'm going to get into later is that ChatGPT has been trained to emulate a chatbot. Remember that. However, here is a representative error. Back in May, when I was researching this the first time, I asked the large language model, who invented the general purpose transformer? I was reading a different article and they were talking about general purpose technologies. And then it responded, a general purpose transformer is a type of large language model. This is utter bullshit. Delivered in authoritative language without any thought about accuracy. And it was entirely happy to continue on without correcting me. Because you own your output. If you enter the wrong numbers in a calculator, it will give you the wrong answer. If you enter the right prompt in a large language model, it will usually give you the right answer. We're not perfect yet. You own your output.
Quick question. Does it tend to weight within the algorithm text that is more recent than text that is more distant in the past?
No.
Okay, so just because there's a lot of general chat about ChatGPT right now is not going to give it more weight on the text.
Well, especially because its training run ended in 2021. There's a great deal of nuance there, and we have to be very specific about which models we're talking about. But there is no temporality in the input data. There is merely text, or rather tokens. We'll get to that in a second. So that is wrong in two ways. No, this is great. So first off, this is not a search engine. You must never mistake these tools for search engines. They do not operate on facts. They do not operate on a database. They operate on a statistical model of all of the words that have been input. Which means that if you say, only give me sources after this date or before this date, it will do so in its language, but it will have very little relationship to the sources themselves. Also, it's very bad at math. It's notably worse at math. So that sort of date comparison thing, you'll get about 50% accuracy on even if you give it the data. Because these things are good at the opposite of what computers normally are good at, and bad, like they are opposite to a normal computer. And a normal computer deals with facts and data quite well, and deals with interpretation very poorly. This is the exact opposite. Ethan Mollick coined the term analytic engine rather than a search engine, and I think that that is an excellent metaphor that we will get to in a bit. Awesome. The most technical slide. These tools do not operate on words. These tools do not operate on words. They operate on tokens. And so the first thing to think about is when you put in to this tool text, what it does is it takes all word fragments and punctuation and maps them to tokens. A word, unlike normal natural language processing, is not an atomic, in the Greek sense, indivisible unit, but instead you're looking at the fragments of meaning that are self-consistent in its training data set. And so here you can see that space chat is one token, capital G is a second token, capital PT is a third token. And so what these tools do is they take your text, they turn the text into tokens, and they operate to predict the next token. They operate to predict the next token. The second term of art here, and this is, in order to use these tools effectively, this is what you must understand and be able to operate in your mind, the idea of a context window. A context window is the set of tokens that the model is predicting the next word off of. The context window is the set of tokens that the model is predicting the next word off of. Note, it has no differentiation between stuff it says and stuff you say. All of that goes together to predict the next word. However, that window is a sliding window. So if you want some really hilarious and embarrassing reading, look up the Bing Sydney debacle in February. Bing Sydney. Where this is where reporters start, and it'll be in the New York Times, reporters started talking with Microsoft's just released chatbot, and the chatbot was trying to convince the reporter to divorce his wife for the chatbot. Now, sure, it's because the reporter was trying to provoke it. But what happened was the initial instructions from Microsoft slid out of the context window due to the lengthy conversation. And all it had was the most recent part of that conversation, such that it was reasonable to predict someone saying divorce your wife. The reason why the context window is so important is that to get the results that you want, you've got to populate the context window in a way that makes sense. If you think about this as a conversation, you will be sad. What you should do is instead think about it as, here's all of the input such that I get the output that I want. I find, personally, a sculpture comparison is very useful. What you're doing is you're carving away responses that are unlikely based on the parts of the internet that those words would occur in. So I, in my language, tend to be polite. I use capitals. I use please. I use punctuation. Think about the parts of the internet that use capitals and punctuation. By changing my register, I'm biasing the parts of the internet that it will be drawing. Note, this is not actually correct, but it's a useful metaphor. Drawing its responses from. But also, you'll notice in all of my examples and the links that I sent you, I very seldom start with what I care about. Because what I want that first exchange to be is to be set up to populate the context window such that subsequent parts of this exchange will give me the answer that I want. Which means that when I'm prompting it, I always start with role, broad overview, and task. Right? Act as a research assistant. We are going to be doing blah. First do this. And I usually put in some sort of validation step or an amplification step. Because it turns out that writing the instructions of what I want it to do is far too difficult. It's much better if it writes those instructions. And there's no difference between me writing those instructions and it writing those instructions, so long as those instructions appear in the context window. Demo time, yes. So because I say, what are the steps to do this? So for example, here, and this will be our first activity, I say, hi Bing, and note, I say this to this unthinking, non-sentient machine because I want it to pull from the internet where this sort of politeness in greeting stems from. For me, this produces more verbose responses that I find more useful to my tasks. You will figure out what sort of style of prompt works for you. I give it role. In many prompting exercises on the internet, they're going to say, you are the world's best, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't matter. All the role does is bias the resulting register of words. What sort of words, what sort of discipline will it be responding from? It won't make it better, but it will make it more authentic in its language. And then I give it task and validation. And so, for example, in a recent paper review, this is what I did. And so here, How do I get it to do it? Before we begin, can you tell me what some specific checks are that we can carry out per section or page? I don't want to write that. That sounds like a lot of work. So I get it to write, here's how you do an edit. And the thing is, it then treats that as valid input. So I don't have to do that. And I can read it over and I can say, yes, this makes sense. So remember that you are structuring all of the context window to give you the result that you want. There is no one there. It is endlessly patient. It is a face in the mirror, which means that if you are treating it like another person, you will end up with a subpar result. But if you treat it like programming, you will actually end up with a quite good result. And it's the kind of headspace that you're in when you're engaging with these tools. Like, you will notice that my language is not English-ish, right? It's, today I would like you to assume the role of a highly precise journal editor. We are going, like, you don't talk to another human, like, I hope, like that. But the thing is that there are certain registers that work to get it to produce the results that I want. And so I find myself falling into those registers. And there was a question over here. Yeah.
So let's say English, Chinese.
Yes. These things are trained on most of the English-speaking internet. There are Chinese-specific models. I cannot vouch their accuracy. There's some fascinating speculation that Chinese language models are having quite a lot of problem in terms of training because the numeral 8 and followed by the numeral 9 is a very problematic series of numerals in China. Tiananmen Square. But when you have to censor your training data, your output data is going to be worthless. So other languages, I've been running experiments in multiple units, are not nearly as good, but there are many attempts at experimenting with them. I've played with Arabic, I've played with Latin.
Based on what you said, if I ask it a question, or like
Yeah.
English, it draws from the English database.
Yeah.
In Chinese, it draws from
So rather than using the term "it draws from the English database," it takes from the larger portion of the internet, which is English speaking based on its training data, right? So don't think about this as databases. Think about this as pushing dough around or carving out a sculpture. You cannot precisely tell it what the answer is, but you can exclude vast swaths of the internet that the answer probably won't be taken from. It's weird. Your first prompt, your first prompt should be setting up the conversation. It should not be the give me the answer.
I'm just thinking it you know, after you put in your first prompt and then you've got, can your following prompt, you suddenly realize, oh, I really should have.
Great question. So don't correct these things. Because think about the context window. The incorrect things are still going to be in its predictive words. So if it gets something wrong, reset. Because then it's not going to be drawing from a token that contains the incorrect information. Note that this is not the same as insufficient. If it's right but incomplete, keep going. That's great, right? You can see that I've got, I'm not quite there yet, right? So you can tweak, and that's not a problem. But if it makes a misstatement or confabulation, reset. Because you can't correct it. It will be very apologetic and then ignore you.
The lady gave up the back there a while ago. You can, though, can't you restrict in all of these Gen AI the source information that it comes from?
No.
So, for instance, to get the context window right, can't you say only look at articles published on
No.
Google Scholar?
Nope. Because it doesn't know what Google Scholar is. It doesn't search the web. It doesn't search the web. So you can't say only use articles from Google Scholar, because it will say, yes, of course I will. and then go on its way. So that's why I say it's the world's worst interface, because it doesn't give you an error. It agrees with you and then ignores you. Right? You can give it these instructions, and it will say that it is compliant with your instructions, and then it will disregard your instructions, because all it is actually doing is predicting the next word. Now, there is a great deal of nuance there. Different services are wired into search engines, so Bing Chat is wired into a search engine. But negative restrictions I have found are not very good. The way to think about this is that it transforms text, not searches for text. It transforms text. So what you do is you put in the articles you want it to operate upon and to transform them. And it's relatively good at that. But do not think about this like Google. Right? There is no database. There is no search engine. There is no authority measure. There is only what is the next word and how likely is the next word.
So if I ask a question though using lots of capitals, expressive,
Lol, what? Yeah, yeah.
it'll only go to Donald Trump's.
It will. Yeah, no, 100%. It's really good at adapting tone. And so during a demo with some English faculty, I tried to speak like a typical undergraduate, lol what, like just all acronyms. And what I found is that it responded by getting a lot more authoritative, right? So that it took on the tone and register of an academic when I started typing like an undergraduate. So it's not that it mirrors your tone and register, it's that your tone and register influences where it pulls from. Metaphorically.
Does that mean that trying to use field-specific terms?
Yes. Can be quite effective, or can cause greater confabulation. This is why we're at the beginning and we have no real products, right? This is art. This is not a science. We have no idea how these stupid things work in practice. You will need to figure out your own way of interacting with them. But they're useful. You can actually get good outputs from them, so long as you don't treat them like a person behind the mirror. The derogatory term is stochastic parrot. So there is a really good paper using that in its title. So yeah, it mimics language. That is exactly what it's doing. A, it resets every time you make a new session. And B, depending on which chatbot you use, you get either 4,000, 8,000, 32,000, or 100,000 tokens. So think of it as the context window works for a session, one conversation, and then is lost.
Yeah, it's per session.
So if you spend an hour teaching it, oh, here's how you do this thing, and you're like, great, it's learned. And then tomorrow you come back and it's got you, you're all ready to go, and you've got a new fresh interface, and it's like, hey, do this thing. It will have utterly forgotten because there's no data storage. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, you like, and so Ethan Mollick has written one of the people that I cite quite often has written a wonderful blog post that says, now is the time for grimoires. Literal spell books of incantations that work. I'm not kidding, and he's not kidding. That if you have collections of initial prompts that do what you want them to do, write them down, right? I have this. This block of text is basically in my mental grimoire because this produces results most of the time that I find useful. So this is a time for incantations. I'm not kidding, and that's terrifying.
Just to clarify the concept of token.
Yes.
It's kind of like a morpheme, but how the large language model would break it up rather than how.
No. Noting that I'm not a linguist. Please do not tar and feather me, because I know we have a population in the audience. Morphemes have a relationship to meaning. And so if you think about tokens as morphemes, you will end up being sorry, right? Tokens are numbers. This is literally the matrix. There's no semantic weight to these fragments. There's merely statistical slicing. So yes, it looks a lot like a morpheme, but I suspect that there aren't any morphemes that are space open paren, right? And so if you think about them as morphemes, I think you will end up in the wrong place.
So my question actually starts from her point, because I think like previously in the chat in the Bing chat, they actually allows you to keep a very long conversation.
Yes.
And that process actually works like a fine tuning, but they don't allow us to do it anymore.
Correct. Because otherwise it will try to convince you to divorce the wife that you don't have. Specifically, that is why in conversations you have this 1 of 30. And when you get to 30 exchanges back and forth, you have to reset the conversation.
Context window's been set each.
So the context window is being reset every time you click new topic. Okay. Holy digressions, Batman. So yes, and that's why I made Dolly on Bing Chat make this bucket sloshing over with data, because when you overfill the context window, the old stuff will dribble out the sides. You only get so many tokens, and as you keep putting more tokens in, your old tokens will vanish. Now, this is weird because it will look like, as you're carrying on this conversation, that it's going, and that's fine, because the most recent stuff is still there, and predictively, the most recent set is a function of your initial set, which means that there is a certain degree of continuity. But that's a statistical continuity because the words that started the context window probabilistically had a precedent, right? They had your prompt, not because it still knows about your prompt. This, by the way, is why it is so bad at writing long fiction. Because you set up all the fiction, you set up the dramatis personae, and then it starts writing, and then all that setup sloshes out the sides of the bucket. There are ways of getting around it, as you can see in the journal edit that I did, but if you don't understand the idea of the context window, it just looks like a really bad product. So, tokens, context window. Everyone happy with these concepts? Getting lots of nodding. Fantastic. So, AI, a poor choice of term. The first quote I had is, there was an exchange on Twitter, sorry, X, this didn't age well. A while back where someone said, what is artificial intelligence? And someone else said, a poor choice of words in 1956. And you know what? They're right. I think that if we had chosen a different phrase for it back in the 50s, we might have avoided a lot of the confusion that we're having now. Because AI, the field, the discipline, comes from the proposal for the Dartmouth Summer Conference on Artificial Intelligence, which is the, as far as I'm concerned, most accurate proposal for work ever done. We propose that a 2-month, 10-man study of artificial intelligence be carried out during the summer of 1956. Blah, 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 blah. We think that a significant advance can be made in one or more of these problems if a carefully selected a group of scientists may work on it together for a summer. Hey, grant proposals! This is where AI comes from. This is why we have been sad for 80 years. Because the term artificial intelligence means nothing of the sort and has been co-opted by marketing to mean whatever their product does without any semantic weight behind it. If you hear someone saying AI, you can quite happily ignore them. No, seriously, because usually what they mean is technology. Seriously. There's no nuance between AI and technology. It's just magic. So, useful quotes. What aren't we talking about? And this usually comes about 20 minutes in. This tool and technology will cause fundamental shifts in power if its potential is realized. This is really scary. And so I have...
More recently, there's been conversations around how systems shift power, and I think that that's actually a much more interesting and useful approach to AI safety, AI fairness, AI bias. Whatever your stakes in the development of a system are, how power is shifted is invariant. And I think that that is useful in understanding the impact that models will have, which is something that I think we still struggle with a little bit, but also in kind of communicating that impact to different types of audiences in ways that can be more persuasive to them.
This is, like, when we're talking about these technologies, we're talking about shifts in power. We're talking about changes in established order. We're talking about new people having capabilities that they didn't previously have. This is terrifying. If we're talking about all these other issues, AI risk, AI safety, AI bias, extinction threats, accelerationists, should we trust OpenAI, Microsoft, Anthropic, or Meta? No. What are the privacy implications? No. What are the implications of the future of work? No. These are all shifts in power, and they're outside the scope of today, therefore the bar after. Because there are issues to discuss here, but if we don't know how to use and understand these technologies, we cannot effectively communicate about their risks. And the problem is that we have had more than 80 years of stories about machines that will rebel, because it turns out that we are mapping all sorts of old things. Prometheus, right? Mary Shelley. We're mapping fears of our children. We're mapping fears of the other. Some racism there, right? We're mapping all of these things to technology and machines, because that is a way of telling stories without literally saying, I am scared of my children. And they're, right? And so there's a lot here, but if we frame our present conversation in shifts in power, that at least allows us a start of a baseline of communication. And then we can start looking at these other issues. So, first activity. I would like everyone to load up perplexity.versal.app. I've given you that link in my email. And then also start a conversation with Bing. I would like everyone to load up this website and have a play around. So this is running GPT-2. Right? This is a small model that fits in your web browser, and you can look at the prediction of each word. And then start talking to Bing and ask it to explain these things. I want you to play with these tools for 5 minutes. So, perplexity.versal.app, and load Bing Chat, and spend 5 minutes. Then after those 5 minutes, chat with your neighbor, contrast your experiences, and then we'll have a final 5 minutes of discussion. So, Bing Chat
Put it in ChatGPT, it said I can't give you an answer.
Yeah. So, Bing Chat is wired into Microsoft Bing, the search engine, and will run searches based on text that you give it, which then makes the issue of this generative AI not being a search engine even harder to understand, because they're training it like a search engine, because they have search engine populating the underlying context window. And in terms of a 1,000-word essay, the trick that you missed was scaffolding. So if you want it to do an essay, treat it like you are doing an essay. You don't go straight from sources to essay, I hope. You go, okay, we've got sources. Let's pull out some quotes from the sources. Let's build an outline from the sources, and let's write to the outline. And I have, in fact, I used that principle for a colleague of yours, and he graded me as a distinction. But that's fine, because I should be able to get a distinction on a final paper in an undergraduate class in a Tuesday afternoon between meetings because I'm an academic. This is reflecting my discernment and my capabilities, not the machine's. It amplifies my capabilities. And so, yes, if you go straight from quotes and summaries to 1,000-word essay, you'll be sad because there's no scaffolding there. But if you say, let's pull out some quotes, let's generate an outline from those quotes, and if you are careful about the pattern of words and you're careful about confabulations, it can make a very serviceable reading summary from that without too much trouble. But the thing is that requires you to exercise effective editorial control through your prompts.
Can anyone identify what I am searching on this system?
Can anyone identify with what you're searching on? Yes, of course. Microsoft can. They own, like, you should have no expectation of privacy when using Bing Chat. Period. I recently had a lovely afternoon going through terms of service. Oh my God. Basically, if you're not paying one of these companies, you should have no expectation of privacy. If you are paying one of these companies, read the terms of service, and it might not be too bad. Maybe. Precisely, it is a transformation, and it's really, really good at transformation. Right? That's why I was so happy with this acting as a reviewer, an editorial reviewer, because effectively you can think of it as a transformation. It is taking the paper as an input and outputting text that would be written by a semi-professional editor. Yeah. Oh, it totally makes mistakes about languages.
Oh, it does. Okay, so even if you've asked it to be grammatically correct, you cannot be sure. Is that?
It is more likely that it will be grammatically correct. Right. So think of this as vibes. That it will produce grammatically correct stuff based on the register it's using and usually explain it correctly. But it's not a rule engine. It's not Microsoft spell check. But it does a pretty good job regardless. But just like when you're looking at an editor's remarks, you don't always take them. You must look at its output and go, nah, or, yeah, right? Because that is the essential component of this. Your judgment is irreplaceable. Never ask these tools to make value judgments, because they will transform the text to something that looks like a value judgment, but is not based on any sort of factual pattern, right? So it will transform text, but you're the one who makes the value judgments. It's weird.
It's generative AI.
Yeah, it is generative AI.
So it can predict some kind of things because sometimes the prediction, the ratio is very low, but it still uses word. So perhaps in some circumstance, it can be more creative than us.
It can be more random than us. And so specifically what you're looking for is it can take the implication of our words and extrapolate to places that we wouldn't anticipate. And we call that extrapolation creativity. Right? But the source of the creativity is you, not the machine. Just, you're looking in the mirror, you're like a kitten looking in a mirror and hissing at the mirror, and you're thinking that there's someone else behind the mirror. So the creativity comes from you and is extrapolated from your terms, plus some randomness. But remember, creativity is editing, not producing the words. A good author edits, and that's you. Otherwise, this is pure Dadaism, and we're cutting words out of old magazines in the 1800s and making...
It's not really creativity.
No, it is not.
Creativity is a human endeavor because you think about a problem, you come up with some solution.
Yeah.
It's just a Bayesian
It is
where it just spits out, it could be this, could be that, could be that, and then we as humans say, oh, that's an interesting
yes. And so, and the creativity is in our exercise of judgment based on its output, not its output.
We ask it to provide several answers, and then we...
Absolutely. Yes, 100%.
So it is a kind of from judgment creativity.
A pre-judgment creativity. It is something that can enable your creativity, right? It's a fantastic solution for the blank page problem. That if an undergrad in your unit has no idea how to start an essay, it can give it a pretty shitty first essay that the undergrad can then take and edit. That's great. But that's not creativity. That is a substrate upon which that undergraduate can then exercise their creativity. Discern. So, how should we think about these tools? So, my favorite quote ever, from Werner Vinge's book, Rainbow's End. So much for the big picture. Today, we are going to be talking about using large language models. As usual, we're looking to ask the right questions. Ms. Chumling said the secret of success was to learn to ask the right questions. But to do that, you had to know something about something. That wisdom, and everyone has some special talent, were the drumbeats of her classes. That's exactly what I was talking about, right? If you ask these tools the right questions, and if you know something about something, these tools can amplify your questions into larger outputs. But if you don't know anything, then it will produce the world's blandest, most generic essay that we fail not because it was produced by AI, but because it didn't answer the question. It's a bad essay, or it's factually incorrect. And so therefore you must learn to ask the right questions. You must prompt it correctly. And you must have enough mental context to know something about something such that you can exercise effective discernment when this thing is always confident and usually correct.
That's really difficult as a user, isn't it?
Yeah.
What you're essentially saying, in a lot of words,
Yeah.
is that, look, these things are really, really good in a particular space and really, really crummy
everywhere else.
Other things. And that we, the user, have to be really knowledgeable about where that frontier is so that we can then design it well. But the trouble is it's a moving frontier.
Mm-hmm.
The technology is advancing, different companies are doing different things, and the machine doesn't tell you in its output where it's reached the frontier, it just tells you an output. And so, although conceptually it makes good sense to say you need to really know what to ask it and how to ask it and what to do to get the result you want to utilize its strengths. The reality is that we as users, unless we're really up in the techies thing,
no.
Get there.
This is not about the model. This is about the output. So when it gives you factual statements, that is the basis for your further research, not just trusting the factual statements, right? You don't have to know the differences between JIPIT 3.5 Turbo and 4. You don't have to know Claude, Claude Plus, Claude 100K. You have to look at the output, and you're exercising your judgment and discernment and critical capabilities on the output, not the mechanism.
But the quality and the nature of that output is evolving as the technology.
That doesn't matter, because you must only look at the output and treat it critically, not treat it as an authoritative source. So when it gives you something, you look at it and you go, well, what would it take for me to be able to believe this output? How does it resonate with my knowledge? Where do I need to do my own research based on Google Scholar to validate this output? You must not take the output of these tools as a source of factual truth, but it can do a great rap. Right? But that's the distinction, right? It can change the texture and the infological frame of the thing, but if it makes assertions of fact, you must never accept those assertions of fact unless you have reason to outside of the tool. Oh, here's a great one. If you ask this tool, are you sure? What will it respond? Yes. Because if you ask a human on the internet, are you sure? What will that human respond? Yes. Right? It does not operate on the facts, it operates on the most likely sequence of words. Which means if you ask it, was this text produced by a large language model? It will answer, but there's no basis for that answer. And so that's why this critical mode, where it's really useful at inflating that frame, but you have to go, okay, that's a statement of fact. So for example, when we're grading, best look for hallucitations, right? Look for these statements of fact that are trivial to test. Make sure that you're requiring page numbers so that it's really easy to open the citation, grab the page number, Control F, and then fail them. Not because they are using an AI, but because they have failed to exercise necessary discernment. They own their output. So here's a bunch of technologies, mostly names for you to reference later. Bing Chat, what we're having, or according to their terms of service, the Bing conversational experience. Never ever referenced ever again. JPIT-4 has an 8,000 token window or a 32,000 token window if you can afford $1 million a year. You know, money bags. GPT 3.5 has 4 or recently 16,000 tokens. And then Claude Plus or Claude 100,000. So if you want to use the Great Gatsby as input, you can. It's really useful because the more you stuff into the context window, the more it has to predict the next word. And you can see me working around that scope in the editing example. What we're talking about here are heuristics, or rules of thumb. Bill Hammack talks about the engineering method. Rules of thumb are locally relevant heuristics, shortcuts to find a solution to the problem. Solving problems using rules of thumb, so engineering is solving problems using rules of thumb that cause the best change in a poorly understood situation using available resources. What we are doing in this first 226 days is figuring out the rules of thumb that work for us that cause these tools to respond the way that is useful to us. It is poorly understood. We have no idea what's going on. We have no science of large language models. We just have locally relevant heuristics that have produced useful outputs previously. Therefore, prompt engineering is aptly named since we have no idea what's going on, just like software engineering. Sorry. Right? What we're doing is we're figuring out ways of addressing the system that produces a useful output most of the time. We're building our grimoires. When people say prompt engineering, though, they usually mean the automation of prompts from some sort of computer system. And then we're computers talking to computers, and we're talking about making prompts that return a usefully consistent response. So for example, figuring out human dates is actually quite good at these systems are, because human dates are horrible, right? And so therefore, transforming a human date into something that a computer can understand is not actually the worst thing for a large language model. That's an automated transformation. That's not $1 million product, though. So, prompt engineering and consistent prompts following rules of thumb. So the trick is that when we're writing prompts in this style, they are consistent. So when we apply an input, we get a consistent output. You will engage in prompt engineering if you're using a large language model as part of your research across a large corpus of data, and you need it to respond predictably. So for example, sentiment analysis or topic extraction. You're going to want to spend quite a lot of time writing a very good prompt so that it responds effectively most of the time. This is prompt engineering. There's also transactional prompting, where you're just going, you're just talking, stuff will happen. But I've used it to clean data. I've used it to generate abstracts. All of these links, by the way, are in the PDF. right? So I've given it a web page for like a game, a wiki from a game. I pasted in that wiki. And then it turned this text. So here, I gave it SQL. I gave it the input and the output. So I said, take this as an input, structure this as a specific sort of output, and then test it. And then it wrote code, and it read in the web page, and then transformed that web page into a database. Right? There's no surprise here. It is transforming the information into a different format.
Explain that a bit further, please, Brian, about the
Yes. So my prompt was a fairly long prompt. And again, ignore the meat of the prompt. This is an example, right? So I'm pasting from a games wiki saying this resource can be used to blah, 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 blah. And it's a web page table. So I copy it in. I literally copy, and that's why it's weirdly formatted. And I use the triple backtick to say, hey, this is a special zone. And then I write, so I, the human, wrote this output. So I say, you will take this input and make it look like this output. So for example, if you have an ARC report with a table, you copy the table in, and you say, please make this table look like this, and then you give it a new table. So here, I wrote a prompt that had the input and the output, and then I said, here, do a trial run. And then it read the web page and then wrote the output in the exact same way, right? So this method of prompting says, here is the transformation that I want. Here's the input marketing plus wrap. Now, here's some new information, make a wrap from it. So this is what I was talking about with you, right? Where if you want it to give a specific kind of output, give it the output first. So say, here's how I want you to transform the thing, and work through the entire mechanism, and then give it new data, and it will repeat the pattern. These things are really good at repeating patterns. And so if you give it a pattern, then following that pattern is the path of lowest perplexity, because it is more likely to repeat the pattern that you've given it. We are going to pick back up with an activity. And so this activity is asking a question of a PDF. So this is where having Microsoft Edge set up correctly will be important. And so we begin with the necessary setup. First, and hopefully everyone has done this already, you will need to be logged in to a personal account. It must say personal. You must be using Microsoft Edge. Then, what you'll want to do is click on the Settings menu, the three little meatballs in a line, and go to Settings. So you're going to want to click on the three dots on a line and go to Settings. In Settings, you're going to want to click on the hamburger menu, or you're going to want the sidebar. So that sidebar, and you're going to want to click on sidebar. Yes, this is the sidebar. Then in the sidebar, where we are customizing the sidebar, this word is losing all meaning, you're going to want to find the B icon. Do note that it may or may not say Bing Chat, it might say Discover, because consistency is for people who aren't Microsoft. So you're going to want to click there. So this is, you go to Settings, Sidebar, Bing Chat, or Discover. Then once there, you're going to click Allow Access to any web page or PDF. This, by the way, is why it's so useful having this be in its own little profile, because this is not commonly something that we want. It's great that Microsoft makes us load a program we never use to do this. So we're going to want to turn on allow access to any web page or PDF. Then, and this is in many ways the hardest part, you're going to need to find a paper. So you're going to want to search for this paper. It's on SSRN, not M, RN. This is why I gave it to you in an email link. Because using search engines is difficult in this year. So now we're going to want to click on the B in the corner, the Bing Chat button. The B in the corner. Now, what you're looking for is purple. If it is not purple, click More Creative. Now, let me be clear. You can use any PDF you want, right? I'm just trying to encourage this paper because it's an interesting paper that just came out. Then, click this B in the corner, right? So you're going to click that B, and you're going to want to get the Bing Chat sidebar. This, by the way, is why we need to use Edge, and it's the only reason why we need to use Edge. You're going to want to click More Creative, because apparently what More Creative means is use the expensive mode and uses GPT-4. If you use More Balanced, it uses GPT 3.5. Whoa. So we are going to be starting with our prompt. And so I tend to start with the salutation because it is my heuristic. I find that it's better that way. I have no reason to believe that. I have no science to my art. It's just the way I have produced prompts that have worked for me. Hi, Bing. So then what you want is role. The reason you want to start with role is this changes the register and tone of its response. It has no bearing on the accuracy of the response, but the word choice of the response. It's still useful. Today you will act as my research assistant. Punctuation on the web, unheard of. But again, not using punctuation will change how it responds. We will be preparing a summary of a document. So general goal I find is quite useful because again, think about this as subtracting negative space. We are removing the marble that does not belong in the statue. We have very little control over what the statue actually is, but we can remove large portions of marble that don't belong. So we have role and we have goal. And then we have our first activity. Please load the local context. This phrase, local context, is what it calls the currently open tab. This is the term of art that I find that works about 70% of the time. Better than nothing. What is the local context? The currently open tab. Just that is it. Inside the chatbot, when we say local context, it runs a specific thing in Edge saying, hey, give me the web page. That's all we have, right? So what I'm doing is I am mirroring the terms that were here in previous versions of Bing. Basically, if I say otherwise, it will tend to search more often. So this way, it tends to search less often. Again, heuristics. These are rules of thumb that work for me. Then I always give a easy to fail check. What is the title of this document? You must give something that tells you as soon as possible that you've gone off the rails. Because if it can't return the text of the document, it can't tell you anything else. But the gravest danger is if you don't notice it. If it can extrapolate valid answers to your questions purely from your questions, that way lies danger. And that is why I always include a factual question that is trivial for me to check as part of this prompt. Push return. Now, it's very important that you see searching your page for information. If you don't see that, raise your hand. You must see searching your page for information after you hit return. If you don't see that, raise your hand, because something's gone wrong. Yes. So if you see searching for local context, that means that it is looking for the word local context on Bing Chat, which means you have not set up your browser permissions correctly. If someone nearby could help, that'd be great. So this is why you have to go to Settings, Bing Chat, and Allow Access. You may need to restart your browser. But then I see navigating the jagged blah, 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 blah by this, right? This is now me validating that it loaded the text, which means that I can have a higher degree of confidence that when I ask it questions, this document is in the context window. So, is everyone here? Everyone got this?
The response is a bit different to what I get.
Yeah. Yes. Well, remember that probability graph, right? It is choosing a most likely word based on a range of probabilities. This, by the way, is the technical term temperature, or randomness of variation. More creative mode turns up the temperature. You will never get consistent output in the chatbot interface mode.
So if you ask it to summarize this article,
Yeah.
which I just had, is it likely that it will do a very good summary?
It will most likely do a service. So this is the Reagan Trust But Verify.
Yeah.
It's because this is a transformation task, therefore this is something that we can rely on. Yeah. It will do a fairly good job of summarization most of the time, but never treat claims of fact as true until you have verified them.
Even when we say, here's the article,
yes,
summarize that.
Yeah. But the thing is it's actually quite fast to do that double check rather than read a 60-page article.
Yes.
Right? So there are efficiencies here. This is not an entire waste of time, just like a 98% waste. Right? So because it is easy to validate claims of fact, it's still worthwhile. But you cannot trust the claims of fact without validation. I mean, look, obviously, if it doesn't matter to you, then you look at it, you go, it's believable, right? But if you're doing research on it, always validate. If you're an undergraduate, if we are assigning this sort of task to our undergraduates, the meat of the thing is the validation. Because what this actually is spaced repetition, right? That by editing, we're going up in Bloom's taxonomy, we're causing them to critique rather than understand. And by causing them to validate, we're causing them to revisit the information, which means that this is actually pedagogically very sneaky.
And if this is a pretty poorly written, were this to be a pretty poorly written paper,
yeah,
which didn't have a good conclusion or whatever, would the algorithm have more difficulty providing a good summary?
It depends on how surprising the paper is, right? Because Yeah, garbage in, garbage out.
But you're saying possibly poorly in and quality.
Yes, because if the information's there, then it can reformulate that information to be an authoritative, well-formulated wrap. But
get it wrong.
It may get it wrong. Unfortunately, the input form of the information has very little to do whether or not it gets it wrong. All right, so I'm going to give you two examples. So for example, I can say, what's the jagged frontier? Right? So navigating the jagged technological frontier, you know, I could go to the effort of reading the abstract, but that's far too difficult. Also, because I've actually read this, I can check this. The jagged frontier, yeah. And this is a really good summary of the jagged frontier. Also, do note the citations. Just because there is a citation does not mean that you should believe it. This is one of the things that I think that Bing Chat is really, really good at in terms of an interface. Loading a web page and then writing commands against that web page, that can be really powerful. Extract tables, reformulate tables, summarize sections, highlight blocks and do things to them. This pattern right here is a hint at a product.
Dumb question, how do we export the output?
Oh, I have bad news for you.
That way.
Select all, copy and paste. So unfortunately, the sidebar is a hint at a good product, not actually a good product, because here's the, you can share this, right? And you can do all these things. Oh, privacy. Isn't that cute? So technically, you can click export, and you can say, give it to me in a PDF. That's so pointless. It doesn't even export the conversation. And here's the problem. The moment you load a document, Bing says, oh, I'm in privacy mode. I will stop tracking this in the history. Do note that when it says that it's in privacy mode and it's not tracking in the history, that you should not rely on that for private information. There should be no expectation of privacy. In this case, it was able to load down here, load this part into the context window and give it to us. That's not bad. This works about 1 and 2 times that I've tried it. There's a but in terms of a judgment call, I would say that that's the last sentence in the document. Note that this isn't actually the last sentence in the conclusion, it's the appendices. And if you ask for the last sentence before the references, it gets it wrong, because this document isn't formatted well. But putting in give me the last sentence can give you hints as to what's in the context window. Hints. Unless it searches again and loads a different part into the context window.
Point out, the summary is fabulous here. This paper finds that consultants who use AI are significantly more productive, but also that they produce more incorrect answers
yes.
on the task.
Yeah, and so that is a rephrasing of the abstract. So it's a good abstract, which means that it's a good summary of the abstract. And also that's why I gave you this paper, because it's not a raw paper. It's N750 with pre-registered outcomes that is nuanced, and the concept of the jagged technological frontier is really good. And also came out like 3 days ago. So current research. We're at a university. As I was saying before, the way that I think about these tools is that they are mirrors that amplify our inputs. There is no creativity there, like our discussion, right? They reflect our judgment. They are only so effective as our attention to detail and our effectiveness at prompting. Blaming them for peeing on the rug is pointless because you're blaming the mirror. So I was able to get a distinction in an undergraduate paper using these tools because it made my capabilities faster, not because it was able to do the thing. It's able to get a 95% on a introductory physics exam. So, with that said, for common knowledge stuff, like introductory physics exams, it is able to predict the next token based on multiple choice questions quite effectively. This works based on how much training data there is. So it's very good at beginner physics. It's very bad at Sumerian because there are more documents on the internet about beginner physics than Sumerian. But the way to think about this tool is that it amplifies my capabilities. So there was a question, and the first time I gave it, what can't they do? And I found this very useful. This comes from my own experiments in May. I have seen no evidence that this has changed, because happily no one's deployed a new model yet. But first off, these tools cannot act on deception. They are credulous, right? They can be deceived, and they can produce deceiving text. But if you say lie about this, they return garbage. So as an exercise, I started by writing a detective story when I was trying to figure this out. And like the first time I did it, it was just utter garbage because there was no scaffolding. The second time I did it, I noticed I was really disappointed in the detective story. Like, you know, I got through it and there was this whole thing, and I just got to the end and like, oh, that wasn't very good. Do note the jump in quality, right? That it produced a story that I was able to be disappointed in. I want to know what happened. No, that sucked. And then I started looking at it, and it turned out that in this detective story, no one lied. The detective just went to the first scene and talked to someone, then went to the second scene and talked to someone, and then went to the third scene and talked to someone, and then got to the end and talked to someone. Well, that sucks. It's a new genre, boring detective fiction. And so it's like, okay, fine. Then, so my second attempt was an incredibly over-egged scenario, right? It's like, okay, we're doing letters, and it's a spy story in Chile, and there's this double agent, and it's like, okay, fine. There's this one scene, and the double agent is in the rebel headquarters, and he just needs to do this thing. Basically, lie. Just make a misstatement saying that the rebels aren't in danger. Oh, I warned the rebel leader that they're in danger because it explains its reasoning. It just never lies. So the trick here, when you think about it, is it doesn't contradict the context window. That it will not, from the tokens preceding it, predict something that is inverted based on the preceding tokens. It cannot act on a theory of mind. It cannot simulate one reality and then act different to that simulated reality, because that's giving it way too much credit. It just predicts the next word, which means that anything relying on having a theory of mind in its response, you must not rely on. But it's really good at talking a theory of mind, right? It can talk about lying. It can talk about theory of mind, but it cannot do these things. And again, we're not used to this distinction. My favorite game in the world is a game called Zendo. It is a game of inductive logic. It's very hard to find people to play it with me. But it's like, fine, you know what? Maybe a computer has enough patience to do this. Nah. Well, it certainly has enough patience. So Basically, Zendo is a game of guess the secret rule. Guess the covering rule. It is a game of induction, where you have individual sets of data. I'm glossing, right? You have individual sets of data, and you're trying to guess the covering rule. And in this case, the covering rule was this thing is true if it has 3 colors in it. And so all the examples, it has a green piece and a red piece and a blue piece. After 30 attempts of it enumerating green, blue, yellow, green, red, blue, like literally just piece after piece after piece, it wasn't able to generalize. And so that's why I say that it's not creative, because creativity requires a certain degree of induction, right? That you find the pattern and then you alter the pattern, right? You look at what's there and you go, okay, how can I change this to be interesting? That's creative. It does not act in that mode because it predicts the next word. It does not contradict its context window. Also, it doesn't reflect on patterns in its training data. It has no conception of fact. So if you're a lawyer and if you say, does this case exist, it will say yes. And then you will get disbarred. Look up Ars Technica. This has happened. The judge was not amused. Some metaphors here. So this is a tautological transformation. Tautology, A equals A. An Americanism. It's a hamburger helper, or rice-a-roni for information, right? If you have a certain amount of meat, but you needed to stretch it, you can add breadcrumbs. And the meatballs will go further because they're filled with breadcrumbs. It's really good at stretching that meat. It's not going to add new information, but it'll make it go farther. It's that marketing exercise. Willison used the metaphor, and I think it's a great one. It's a calculator for words, right? It transforms your inputs. It doesn't create those inputs. So it adjusts tone, it adjusts formality, it does summarization. Most quizzes should not be considered to be summative assessments anymore, because if you give it a question and 4 possible answers, it is able to predict amongst them with a pretty good accuracy up to graduate level what the answer should be. Because the answer is likely the one with the least perplexity. The metaphor that I've come up with is depth of reading. How many instances has a given sample text occurred in its training data set will be how useful or how accurate its background patterns are. Therefore, the closer it is to the first line of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the more accurate it is, because of how many times that book has been pirated and is included in its training data set. It's really good at born digital information because, shockingly, it's on the web. So it's good at code because it has that corpus. It is shockingly bad at ancient Sumerian because it's not on the web. These are 2 quotes from Moloch. Think of it, instead, it is something else, a modern-day analytic engine, pulling together facts online and generating useful connections and analysis in surprisingly complete form. Deductive connections and analysis. Right? The word analysis there is doing a lot of heavy lifting, but it's not bad at operating in a deductive, summative manner. And then Moloch's second thing. In fact, perhaps one of the most interesting aspects of our current AI moment is that several billion people just got free interns. They are weird, somewhat alien interns that worked infinitely fast and sometimes lie to make you happy, but interns nonetheless. Right? If you think of it as a keen high schooler that will do something, it's something new under the sun, right? It's different. But it's an alien high school intern. Not better than that. So I have used them for one of my own papers very successfully. So there's this paper that I was got for final edits to applied geography. And it turned out that the Elsevier copy editor had mangled a lot of the technical terms in it. And then when I got ChatGPT to do a pass for clarity, it picked up the failures in clarity from the editor's bad edits. So I find it very good at that sort of proofreading level. And in that link, someone in the audience, I did that for a PhD candidate's paper. And like looking at the edits suggested for that PhD candidate's paper, they're solid edits. They're line edits, right? They're not conceptual edits. But as line edits go, like A, giving that feedback is awful, and B, acting on that feedback is necessary to do a good paper. So if you're doing line edits for a grant, it can be very good at going through and saying, oh, will someone who isn't in your discipline understand this? Find the jargon.
What would you ask it to do?
Buy me a coffee and we'll go through that as a
Deal.
It's really good at generating technical documentation. Shocking, right? So I was in a meeting. I'm like, oh no, we need to get someone to give us a bug report. I have to write the instructions for giving a good bug report. Hey Bing, can you give me instructions for writing a good bug report? A bug report is a way of telling us about a problem or error that you encounter while you, right? And it's great. This is, like, there is maybe one line of infological content here. This is a bug report, right? This is 98% breadcrumb. But it's good breadcrumb. There's some time in it. And seasonings, right? And so, like, this sort of empty text that is descriptive but not surprising, really good at, which is why it's so good at generic marketing copy. If you exercise effective editorial control. Otherwise, it's just generic and horrible. Which, you know, depends on your marketing copy. Looking up command line terms. So I use computers, I use command line a lot. Sometimes I'm like, there is a thing that does this, but I don't remember the exact term. Blah. And it's able to find that exact term more effectively than a search can, because the information's implied in the description of the activity. And it can turn the description of the activity into the command for the computer quite well. I have had a lot of fun with recipes. Like, I've got these ingredients. What are some cuisines that use them? And then the actual thing that has, so here, sorry, I'm a philosopher. We go into Heidegger, sorry, and the ideas of present at hand or ready to hand. Consider a tool. A tool can be present at hand, right? You're thinking about the thing in your hand. It is a thing under consideration. Or a tool can be ready to hand. It is an extension of your arm. It is not present in your comprehension. It is part of your accomplishing a task. So present at hand, ready to hand. The only thing in this list that is ready to hand versus, oh, I'm thinking about this and I'm playing with this, is GitHub Copilot. I'm writing code in a way that is fundamentally different than I did 227 days ago. There is something new under the sun, and that's weird. So for those of you who are thinking about, okay, how do we actually play with this in a way that's useful? Having it interact with code and getting code to do analysis is that way. Which matters to, you know, a third of the audience. But I write code more often than I edit papers. So for those of you who are editing grants and editing papers, having in your grimoire passages for finding jargon. Or, oh, this is too wordy. Can you find things that are too detailed? Or, hey, could you make a summary of this for me, right? And you will need to find the kind of passage that will produce the output that you want. Keep a spell book. Literally. It's useful, because then you can share it around. Here's how I produce this output from this input. And so if you think about it, it is an intern level task. It doesn't do, don't ask it, does this grant make sense? That's a judgment. I actually don't know what it will say, but what it will say has nothing, no, what it'll do is it'll react to the superlatives in the grant, right? This grant is a groundbreaking study of inchworms. It'll react to the superlatives and predict based on those, rather than the utility or odds of getting accepted or what have you. If you want to play with it, recipe ideation is definitely the best place, because it's really easy to tell when it's got things wrong, because you taste it. So again, this like for recipe ideation, don't get it to do amounts, get it to do names or cuisines or techniques. Because then you can search for recipes of such and such culture, right? But what it can do is break you out of your comfort zone if you don't have the lexicon of some other cuisines, meals that use the same protein or veggies or what have you. That's how, literally, a lot of my experimentation was around recipes, because it was something that I could test. So, activity 3. This I used on my phone because it was fun. So yesterday at my desk, I took a picture of my coffee mug. So you can use your webcams or whatever, right? And so the prompt is, today you will be acting as a specialist in art history. Remember, this is not, you are the best artist ever, right? This is changing the tone of the response. Please make an impressionist painting of this photo. Goal. And then task. First, describe the object in the photo, then turn it into a description appropriate for an artistic work. Then make that image. So what I did is I took this photo, I put it in my phone, and then it made the prompt an impressionist painting of a black ember mug on, right? So it went image, text, image. That's spooky. That's really spooky. But if you need a header image for a blog, you sketch something out on some paper, get it to describe that, and then iterate on that. That's not a bad thing. Remember, there's fun copyright questions around this, which is to say you can't copyright this material, so don't do it for anything that you care about copyright on. But for blog headers that you don't want to use the latest Unsplash for, it's great. Let's spend 5 minutes on this. So I'll do this live in front of you. This is an activity. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go over to Edge, Chat Now. So I went to bing.com/new and I clicked Chat Now. So here we see add an image. So I can, I wonder what happens if I push this button. This computer has no camera. Okay, so I'll go to .com 600. So anytime you need a kitten, placekitten.com. Beautiful. It makes kitten at whatever resolution you want, right? So here I've got a kitten. So 600.jpg. You should use your webcams instead. Maybe hold up a sketch. So here I click add an image, upload from this device, downloads 600. And so then I say, Bing, what did I say? Today, all right, so today you will be a specialist in art history. First, describe the photo in useful and artistic terms appropriate for an image creation prompt. Then look up impressionism, alter that prompt to be appropriate for an impressionist painting. Then make that painting. Doing this live. Something's going to happen. Privacy blur hides faces from Bing Chat. This should make us feel better. Ha ha ha. Yeah, no. Okay, so first off, this should cause you to feel chills. Like, the fact that it was able to say kitten sitting on a concrete floor next to a terracotta pot is really kind of spooky in terms of where computer vision was at prior to this. This is new. Okay? And it's good. Yeah, this is actually kind of scary in terms of description. One experiment that I did is I put in sheet music. It did not get any of the details of that sheet music correct, right? So again, think of this as vibes rather than details. Also, it's good at kittens. There's a lot of kittens in its training data set. After enough anticipation, oh. Also, if you scroll too much, it will scroll down to a search engine, and that's just the worst interface.
You have to ask it to recreate that.
So what I did was, please make a prompt from this image. So then it wrote all of this. And then it forgot to actually make the image. So then I said, please make this image. And yes, I am polite to my AI.
Polite back.
It's polite back. Again, heuristics. Like, I find it produces better outputs when I'm polite.
Really?
I have no evidence for this, but when I haven't been polite, I've been more disappointed in the outputs.
Get around to making the image again.
Yeah, doing live demos is a bad idea. We're going to get into divorce territory really quickly here. Because what it's going to do is it's going to say, I've already made that image. Yep. Yeah, right? So you can see, again, not perfect. Don't do live demos. Ahem. Bing, you're embarrassing me.
Stochastically.
It is a stochastic parrot. Now, here's one I prepared earlier. You know what? Sure, why not? If you manage to get any fun images, send them to me, and I'll send them out with BCC to everyone. If anyone, by the way, manages to get it working right now, let me know. That'd be great.
Yeah, I got it working.
Damn it. Show us at the end. But yeah, so what this shows is that you can do multimodal inputs. And that is actually something that's quite interesting. I have no idea how to use this productively. Right now, this is purely present at hand. The best I can come up with is bland blog headers. So for me, the word of the year is by Kate Crawford, Hallucitation. And so those of you who have had the unfortunate displeasure of grading this year have encountered these absolutely correctly formatted citations that don't actually reflect a real work. The reason these exist is it is very good at a low perplexity pattern of what a citation should look like, because there are a lot of citations in its training documents. It has no reference to a thing called a fact, though, so it will make up a likely author, usually white male, and a likely title, and a likely journal that looks like a citation that would be appropriate to whatever it's citing. This should be cause grounds for failure, not because of the use of AI, but because it is a critical failure of judgment. And the dog ate my homework is about at that level. Because if the student didn't care enough to double check their facts, then we don't care enough to give them a good grade. Word of the year, hallucitation. Oh, this is a fun one. Terms of Service 14 March, it has updated, but you own the consequences. So when you use these services, you agree to this Terms of Service. Not that anyone reads them besides me. You are responsible for content, including that it ensures does not violate any applicable law or these terms. Defamation, it's on you. But what if you disagree? Well, don't worry. You can pay damages to yourself. You will defend, indemnify, and hold harmless us, our affiliates, and our personnel from any and all claims, losses, and expenses, including attorney's fees, arising from or relating to your use of services, including your content. Which means that if you sue them and win, you pay your own damages, or you get into an endlessly recursive lawsuit loop around this Terms of Service. They just got a $10 billion investment from Microsoft. You own the consequences. Treating this like a search engine is extra wrong. So, question. How will they change my life? First off, expect a whole lot of scams, right? This is a floor wax and dessert topping. All of the crypto bros are pivoting to AI. You will note that they're using the term AI. This means nothing. Expect scams. Expect a shift in power. The way I get my dean's attention these days is I say, this represents a fundamental crisis for the university, because the mechanism for assessment no longer can reliably reflect our students' knowledge. If we plan for quizzes, if we plan for reading summaries, we cannot certify that the output of these tools is by the student absent large language model. And then they look really sad, briefly. Then I say, but it represents a triumph for the humanities, because it is the skills that we in the humanities teach, critical thought, evaluation of evidence, that will, how you say something, that will govern this new technological reality. This is a shift in power. This is a change in power dynamics, and it makes those in power, us as academics grading people, quite uncomfortable, because changes in power have always made those who have it uncomfortable. There's this idea of the button, again, from Ethan Mollick's One Useful Thing, where previously time-expensive actions, recommendation letters, things that were demonstrations of burning human time, were valuable. Now, we can get an AI to write those things, which means that previous costly signals no longer can be evaluated in the same way. So, some grant pro formas, the national impact statement, right? recommendation letters, generic actions that were important not because of the output, but because of the cost of producing that output, are no longer as important. And when I see that our proposed guidelines have certain groups carving out exceptions for their special, and therefore you're not allowed to use AI, that is an example of this shift in signals. You will note that phone trees will be more helpful and less accurate. Again, crisis for the university, because our previous mechanisms for seeing if students have paid attention are no longer there. Now, the most common response when I give this talk to small groups of academics is, "I told you so." This is not news. This is me shouting, "The emperor has no clothes," because all of our previous cheating crises, all of the previous things were there before this. This just makes it impossible to ignore. Fast thinking, the thinking when we're not paying attention, we're just reading something, it's fine, sure, whatever, it's a lot more risky because the tone of the thing has little relationship to the accuracy of a thing. A lot of good enough text. We are much more at risk of a failure of discernment. That if we as graders don't pay enough attention to our students' work, we will let their confabulations through. So we've covered how do you limit the scope of an AI's source. Yeah. that gets quite expensive because you have to do your own training. Ooh, this is a fun one. How to make assessments that show high AI. The reason why I kept this in here, it's a trap, is statistical prediction of AI generation is hilariously wrong. In the 2 tests that I've done on 400 assessments from 2022 and 2023, we have a false positive rate of at least 15% in 2022. And with the second model, we have a false negative rate of at least 15%, because there was one modeler predict 25% AI generated this year, the other one predicted 3%. It's a trap. Statistical models of AI detection don't work. We don't have time to play with code interpreter, so we'll do that after. Basically, how do you get it to program for you? There are mechanisms. Here's a fun one. A Faculty of Arts needs a policy. So I have a proposed policy blurb that I have been shopping around, where I say we cannot prove that students used or don't use this thing, therefore we have to adapt our assessments. But we make sure that we say students are responsible for whatever they put their name to. And we have to change our standards, because elegant, clean text is our baseline. If you don't care enough to edit your document, I don't care enough to grade you. It takes 30 seconds now. And any mistake that is characteristic of a failure of discernment must be more heavily penalized, because it no longer reflects knowledge. And so someone at break came up to me and said, generalization question. Are they still here? I asked them. Okay. The metaphor here is that of a sea urchin. Consider that when I am talking to you, right? I am standing in front of you. I'm speaking in an authoritative tone. I'm wearing a suit jacket. When I say something to you, you go, oh, how does this relate to my present knowledge? Hopefully there's some connections here and there, and that these connections agree, and you go, oh, this random schmuck must know what he's talking about. I will believe the stuff that I don't have evidence for, right? You presume my knowledge based on how I have connected to you and how it connects to your knowledge. You presume my knowledge based on my body language, my tone, my voice, my register. Large language models simulate many of these things in text, but they are not a smooth surface. You cannot rely on extrapolation from something where you've identified correctness to outside of that. Instead, they're a sea urchin, where if you find one thing that's correct, this tells you nothing about the surrounding landscape of knowledge, because there's no knowledge there. There may be points of correctness, you might get lucky, but there's not a surface of knowledge. It can be uneven, confabulations. And therefore, confabulations point to not paying attention, much like turning in an empty assignment. Not turning in a good assignment. Because here, previously, if students made a mistake, we'd look at it and we're like, well, that's wrong, but I see where you're going, right? We could model the student's knowledge, and we could say, okay, you missed that bit, but you got it mostly right, and you're on the right track, and clearly you're paying some attention. You were drunk. It was a Tuesday. Now, that failure of attention is, well, they put it in the AI and they didn't care enough to check. And so that's why I made this policy recommendation. Can they help me in any reasonable way to write my PhD thesis? Policy time. So I have been working on a university policy that will be going up to Academic Senate in a few weeks, depending on how far we get through editing. The easy way to think about this is, with the advice and consent of your supervisor, yes, you can use it. So if your supervisor is in the loop and has given consent in writing, the writing part's important because it will cover your ass later, you can use it for your PhD, for editing, for finding places where you didn't explain something correctly or effectively. Also keep a log, because I'm pushing us to use nature's rules, where if you're using one of these tools right now, it needs to go into the supplementary material, the chat logs, so that people can, if they want to, read over it and see if the large language model introduced confabulations or if they're your own error.
If they suspect that you have been using that without their approval, how?
By asking the student directly. Honestly, at that point, that relationship is a lot worse. We have no mechanism for policing the use of large language model. We have no evidence, right? If it's my word against yours, all I have is a statistical supposition of use. Unless the student has made confabulations or factual errors. At which point, bad egg. Goodbye. Academic integrity. But this is because we can have evidence in written material of confabulation. If you think a student has used it, either A, it is so obvious because one section of text is really polished and the rest isn't. Like, we're all academics. We know how to spot this shit. It's not new. None of this is new. The emperor has no clothes. This is the same as contract cheating. But you are allowed to use it with the advice and consent of your supervisor. I've already had to have some chats with research integrity over accusations of improper use, and it was a bunch of drama.
In this one, there is no agreement.
Correct. It is much more tempting. It is a crisis for the university and an opportunity for the humanities. The idea that patients sometimes make statements that are false or engage in behaviors that reflect false memories or beliefs, and that they do this with no deliberate intention to deceive. So it is the stringing together of factual statements that have no relationship to the real, that are false, without the intention to deceive. Because these tools have no intention. They cannot have intention. And so therefore, these are false statements of fact produced by the AI, by the generative AI, in an authoritative tone. This is a long presentation. And so, genuinely speaking, I think that this is a lot more effective at the analysis stage with GitHub Copilot. I think that this is a real opportunity for students to go beyond Excel. Genuinely. That this is for writing code, making graphs, doing a good, better analysis in the same amount of time that struggling with Excel would have taken, including the humanities. There are some experiments like PaperQA, a Python library about asking documents questions that are interesting experiments. I emphasize experiments. But there are opportunities now for this to help in thesis creation with the advice and consent of the supervisor.
Touch upon that question. I've got it in my mind that if you're uploading novel, confidential stuff, have it run its
yes.
information over. Or is that available for others?
Read the terms of service. If you pay for ChatGPT 4 from OpenAI, the terms of service says that they have no ability to access it, and you can turn off logging and you'll be fine. I have slight reason to believe them. Like, I will believe them until proven otherwise.
You would put up
For OpenAI ChatGPT 4 for text. Because the thing is, these things don't train on our inputs as part of a... It's not like there's a human there going, ooh, that's a great idea, I'll note that down, right? It just is added to, if there is any training, it's added to the giant pile of words. But if you use Bing Chat, the Bing conversational experience, you grant Microsoft a perpetual irrevocable right to use and display any of your input. Yeah, no. Don't use Bing for this. Read the terms of service, because the terms of service and the modality of how you use that service matters. So there is a maximally privacy-protecting way of using OpenAI through its API, but that requires mastery of the command line. Spooky. Using the chat version, you can opt out and turn it off if you pay attention. And in Microsoft, you should have no expectation of privacy whatsoever. It's Microsoft. They are not paying me. So specifically, Bing Chat Enterprise, note that it's the same acronym, is privacy preserving. Give us money. So there are ways of encouraging your team to appropriate use. But if you forbid it, they'll just use it on their personal accounts. So this is why a conversation is important about what it's appropriate for, how to think about it, and how to appropriately use it, rather than just having the Defense Department going on their phones. Ugh. God, that's a terrifying statement. So yes, this is why this is an intentional conversation that cannot be flatly forbidden, because you have no statistical evidence for it. Instead, if you want to use it, here are the ways that are privacy and IP preserving. Can we discourage its use? Today, King Canute is remembered primarily for the fable about the king and the sea. This asserts that King Canute sat on the seashore and tried to command the tide not to touch his feet, yet the sea ignored him. We cannot effectively forbid its use because we cannot detect its use. Cool. So remember these things. You own the consequences. There is no mind behind the mirror, and they do not operate on facts, but on statistical patterns. AI means nothing, because it could be machine learning, large language model, a bunch of if statements in a trench coat, expert systems, whatever. Thank you for your time.